Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good day to all of you, my dear students. I hope that you are doing well, and a very warm welcome to you in lecture number 29 of report writing skills. If you remember the way I ended my previous lecture, there were two things that we discussed in detail and talked about: tenses. There are three categories and the four subcategories which are part of each tense. If I talk about the past, the present, and then the future. And within these, we had the indefinite, the continuous, the perfect, and perfect continuous. In this way, we can simply say that there were 12 categories that we discussed alongside some examples to understand and differentiate one from the other. Moving ahead, we talked about the way these tenses become part of a verb and the way that specific category of a verb is used based on the subjects and every other component which is coming alongside those subjects. And there were some rules that we discussed, around 14 to 15 rules, if I'm not wrong, the way we covered them, known as the subject-verb agreement. And lastly, I told you that we'll be covering another component, making it part of our today's lecture. And afterwards, we're going to move towards the next topic, which will be covered in detail within this lecture number 29. But I want to take you towards the next advanced version of this grammar that we are studying, and that is the word order. So now the focus would not just remain on those tenses, the way they are signified, the way subject and verb occur together within a sentence, but now we are going to move ahead and look into each and every other part of speech as well. When they are placed to form a sentence, there has to be an order, and there are rules of those orders that we'll be looking, and that's why it took me a while to add all these different colors which are there visible on your screen as well. But the purpose was to differentiate each and every part from the other so that you may know what should be the order when you have to make a sentence. So if we talk and if we start with the rules and guidelines, the basic one, of course, is that your subject should come first. Then you're going to have verb or verbs. Why S? Because there are sentences within which it all begins with a helping verb and then you have the main verb. So in that case, there are verbs. And then at the end, you also have an object, and together all these three form a sentence. As you have within the example, I being the subject, verb is speak, and English is the object. And all together they form a simple sentence. If we move ahead, and in case of using indirect and direct objects, so we are not just restricted to a single category as you have just seen within this simple statement which is there in the beginning. There are objects which are direct objects being referred to, and the indirect objects which are basically included for the explanation. So when these are together within a sentence alongside the reference of place and time, so then you have to follow an order which is there within this statement, or you can call it as a formula. It all will begin once again from the subject, then you're going to place the verb, then the indirect object will come first, followed by the direct object, and then comes the time of place, and finally time. This is the way you move ahead whenever you have to place all the different parts. And the example, if you look into it, I will tell being the verb, you is the indirect object, the story is the direct object, at school, place, tomorrow is time. So this is the way, if you look at the sentence, everything has been beautifully separated, or I would say segmented for you with colors to understand the way You have to follow the word order. This is the way you order the words to form a sentence. So simple rule, sometimes a bit tricky, but that's the way you have to move ahead. Once again, a bit of practice and you'll become perfect. So if I take you towards the next one, in case of using the subordinate clause, because of course the sentence is also a clause, you can call it as the independent clause as well, because it exists independently, it has its own meaning. But there is another category of a clause known as the subordinate clause or the dependent clause, which cannot exist independently because it requires alongside with it the independent clause, because this becomes the extension of that independent clause, and together when these are placed together they form once again a sentence which is complete and makes a sense. What makes a subordinate clause or a dependent clause? So basically these are the conjunctions as you have at the very beginning, and with this you basically form a subordinate clause, and whenever it's there the order will be once again, the rest of it would almost be the same, but this conjunction which is basically making this clause a dependent clause or a subordinate clause, this component has to be placed first, which is why it's there at the beginning, conjunction, and then you will move ahead with all the other components, your subject, your verb, your indirect object, direct object, place and time. So this is why now if you look at this statement as well, it'll look a bit confusing, because I don't have time now. To whom are you referring to? Why are you saying this thing? What's the point? There isn't any other statement for which this is like an extension. So now if you look into it, and if I say I will tell you the story tomorrow because I don't have time now. Now things are more clear, because I will tell you the story tomorrow is the independent clause. If I do not include this because I don't have time now, doesn't matter. The statement itself is self-explanatory. And if I place this one right after it, it will also be an explanation of the previous point. But if I place this independently, it will confuse you. So for your explanation only, this has been placed just to let you know what is basically the order in case of a subordinate clause. So this because will come first, and the rest of it is once again the same as highlighted with colors. Another point to focus is that if the emphasis is not on time, the time factor, then it can be switched. It can be placed at the beginning of a sentence as well as this one. Just the way I said it in the previous example, I will tell you the story tomorrow. So according to the journal conventions, if you have to highlight time, it has to be placed at the end. However, if it's not that important, then it can be placed at the beginning, so that the focus should remain on the indirect object, the direct object and place. Time will become like an extension as it's going at the beginning. So by rules, by convention, this can be done as well as within this example. In case of adverbs of frequency, the expressions are always, never, usually, I usually do this, I've never done this, or you're always walking. Place these adverbs before the main verb except for be as main verb. So this be, if I talk about it at the beginning, so it has multiple extensions. There is a name for it as well, you can Google it for your explanation, but the verb be does not just stand for be, because it also generalizes is, am, are, was, were. They all are like an extension of this verb be, and whenever we are referring to this be, you need to include and keep in mind all the other extension of this be as well, although they look structurally different from it, but basically they all arise from it. So is, am, are, was, were, all together, all collectively known as the verb be. And B is basically the auxiliary verb, which is known as, like, auxiliary verb are the helping verbs, and these verbs are also divided into two categories: the primary auxiliary verbs and the modal auxiliary verb. This is basically another general information, which is why it's not there, because we are studying the rules. But in general, the primary auxiliaries are be, do, and have, and do can be did as well, do can be the done, the third form as well, and have can be had, and so on. But these are the primary auxiliary. Now if I talk about the other category, the second category of the auxiliary verbs, it's may, might, ought, can, could, shall, should, would, and etc. and so on. So these are all auxiliary verbs divided into two categories. You have the primary auxiliary, you have the modal auxiliary. Primary auxiliary be, meaning is, am, are, was, were, do, did, have, has, had. Primary auxiliary. You have the modal auxiliary: may, might, ought, and so on, the way I just told you: shall, should, would, etc. So these are the categories. And now once again read the statement. In case of the adverbs of frequency, you place these adverbs before the main verb, except for one situation where the main verb is be, as provided within the example as well. When that example comes, you will understand it. So it will be placed first as you look into the rule, the subject, and then the auxiliary is coming first. When this auxiliary will be the main verb, it will come after the adverb. So you can see this is the adverb, and on the left hand side this is the auxiliary be in journal, and the main verb is on the right hand side or coming after the adverb. Just are the rules: place these adverbs before the main verb. So it's basically before this main verb, and then comes the main verb, and then object and place and time. I often go swimming in the evenings. Once again, subject, adverb, main verb, then time. You move ahead. He doesn't always play tennis. So auxiliary, adverb, then your main verb, and basically what you do, the object. Then once again auxiliary, the adverb, and then the place. And this is the one that I wanted you to know. Over here, never, or this adverb of frequency, is coming before this be. Be, this is basically an extension of that be, plus en, another extension of that be that I've been talking about. This is the one. So this is one extension of this point, which is why it's coming here. And now hopefully you've got the idea what I wanted to convey to you. So now if we move ahead. In case of the adverb of manner, like slowly, carefully, awfully, so these adverbs is placed after the direct object. So if you look into it, this is the rule: placed after the main verb in case there is no direct object. So if you look into the rule, the subject will come first, then your verb, then the direct object, and then this adverb which has been referred to. So it's basically placed after the direct object. As you can see, this is the direct object, and then comes the adverb, and placed after the main verb when there is no direct object, as in this one. Compare it with this one: he drove the car, which is the object, carefully, and he drove carefully, meaning there is no car, so he drove carefully. So it's coming right after the verb. So this is the rule. And same word order is also followed in case of the use of the adverb of place, where there are here, there, behind, above, before, and even for the adverb of time, such as tomorrow and yesterday. So these are the components which should be there within your mind. Rule is once again the same, only difference is of the adverbs of manner, place, and time, and frequency. In case of an interrogative expression, the one in which you raise a question, so in that case, of course, when there is a WH category, so this WH expression will be placed first, then your auxiliary verb will come before the subject. This is the rule number 2 when you are talking about the word order of an interrogative expression, and that's how you make the rule as it goes towards the rightward direction. The interrogative expression, WH, then the auxiliary, then the subject, then verb, indirect, direct, place, time. So what would the auxiliary, subject, other verb like to tell indirect object me? So in this way, separate categories, and there are even expressions within which there is no WH category, like this is the one, as you can see. Did you have a party in your flat yesterday? So over here there is no WH category, and you can clearly see that still it is a question and it's moving ahead. Now we are going to take a start of our main topic that we are going to be covering within detail, and that is barriers to the effective communication, because that is the ultimate goal that we all want. We want to be good communicators, we want to be good interlocutors, we want to be good speakers, writers, readers, listeners. So in every way we want to develop good skills, be it the productive skill or a receptive skill. But there are always certain barriers, certain blocks, certain obstacles, certain impediments which are coming in the way. Sometimes we are able to notice, sometimes we are not able to understand them, but their proper understanding is needed. It's essential, especially when it comes to the professional environment, because you need to minimize their effect as much as you can with some good awareness, with some good understanding, and that is going to help you a lot within your professional environment. So I'll be taking a start. If I take you towards the basic component, so there can be different faults within that communication system being used for the two-way traffic, sending and receiving of messages, which can itself become an impediment and barrier and affect the overall process of this communication. One can be these mechanical devices being used for the transmission, and they may develop some technical fault, some technical error, because of which this impediment has arisen. Then it could be certain use of these symbols. Even if I talk about those alphabets, those letters, so they are not even the same for different languages. There are certain similarities, but there are differences as well. There are different modes. Even these expressions, if I just say the name which is coming in mind, back in time, hieroglyphics. So these are also certain symbols that we use, even that you find within your letters of English language as well. They're also like one way or another connected with that hieroglyphics, which is the, I can call it as the ancient writing for your understanding. The cuneiform writing is also another way. These are the symbols which are used in ancient carvings and within the tablets which are found in caves, in stones. So those carvings, they have this specific pattern, and this pattern is basically in the form of small triangles which are connected either horizontally or vertically, and they could be much advanced. I have just seen few symbols, few examples, and that kind of writing is known as the cuneiform writing, one way or another with some cones, with some triangulars. But coming back to the purpose, the symbols which are used for communication also vary. They are very much advanced and varies from language to language and culture to culture. And then moving ahead, nature of the individuals who are engaged in communication can also become a barrier as well. So not just the symbols, just the mechanical error, but the nature, the personality, the ideology, the perspectives, everything. When there are differences, those differences can become a barrier if those differences are not recognized, when they are not accepted. So a proper awareness is needed to understand all these barriers, the way they surround us, and once we know them, we'll be able to minimize them as much as we can. So let's take a start by dividing these barriers into categories for our own understanding, for our own convenience. So we divide them into the physical barriers, we have the semantic barriers, we have the language barriers, then we have the socio-psychological barriers, we have the kind of barriers that we find within the organization, and then we have these intercultural or cross-cultural barriers which are developed because of, if I call it in simple way, cultural diversity which exists. So if it's not recognized, it can become a barrier as well, because one thing which is acceptable for you may not be acceptable or a norm for another person belonging to a separate culture, and therefore will be a bit difficult, probably be a taboo for you, probably be acceptable for them, and therefore they'll be looking in a strange way towards you, that why are they behaving that way. But culture defines us. Culture is something which gives us the identity, and this identity has to be recognized so that it may not turn into a barrier. So we'll be discussing each category one by one and alongside certain examples. Some of them you may know about them. There might be some categories that would be new, just the way while I was just studying and reading and extracting. So I found many things and I found them quite interesting, and I thought we'll certainly share with you people as well. So let us begin, starting from the physical barriers. As the word itself, physics says it, so it can be a defect in the medium. For example, if you look at the communication happening through a telephone, through the postal system, or a courier service for sending things, or an electronic media. So all these are the media, and there could be certain defect. Even some problem within the line of a telephone can cause much of the problem. The postal system or the courier service, it can have certain problem as well, and which is why the message can get delayed. There could be certain distortion, or even at occasion a complete loss of message. But sometime there is another situation which happens, and that is this partial failure, which is considered to be even more harmful than a full failure of a mechanical equipment, because something which is totally malfunctioning or has turned itself off, so that means that they will not send an incomplete message, because an incomplete message can cause even more confusion. So if it's not, if something is not being sent, it's better than sending something which is incomplete or bad. So therefore, it's the same thing as you can say, silence is golden. Silence is better than saying something rubbish. So either you should say something good, or if you don't have something good to say, then silence itself is better than saying something else. So if I give you the example with reference to the physical barriers, if a fax message is delivered at a wrong number, now you know what will happen. Well understood. In a similar way, if there is a document which is not printed properly, so can be dull, might be a problem of toner, or a bit blurry, or some of the text missing. So the other person, who is basically the receiver, can get annoyed and will ultimately become a barrier as well. In such a scenario, what basically you can do is that this communication can be postponed for a while if there is no alternate solution for you in that circumstances. So if a delay or if this procrastination for the time being, for a short period, is possible, in which you can just resolve the issue, it's it's okay, it's good, rather than simply sending something which is incomplete, which will become a barrier. If you move ahead, within these physical barriers is another category, which is the noise in the environment. I don't know whether you are able to hear it, but there is a plane passing by, and there could be similar noise within the environment, sometime honking of some automobiles or some trucks while they are passing. So they can cause a bit of problem within the meeting as well while it's ongoing. That was by chance, by the way. I came across the slide, and noise in the environment at the same spot at the same time. I'll make sure that you are able to hear the voice of the plane. Let's hope so. But the plane just passed by. So it could be the traffic, it could be the factory work, it could be the people talking. So in such a scenario, one solution that can be adopted is that organization have these soundproof rooms, and they have it especially at occasion when they have to hold some serious, some formal meetings, some formal talk. In such a scenario, they make sure that the rooms are soundproof so that such voices are not caught, they do not become part of any recording which is happening or some call, because they create a lot of distortion and a bad impression. Then another category, as visible in front of you, is this information overload, because there are few things which are required, just the way I have been talking and discussing within almost all lectures, while we were saying that some specific information has to be provided to your target audience, because that is basically their expectation. But if you overburden them with lots and lots of information, then you won't be able to simply get the fruit that you expect from them in return in the form of the feedback, because they won't understand what you actually want them to understand and to convey. So if I talk about it in another way, too much information flowing through the media that a good deal of it does not reach. So this is what happens, because you are sending a bulk of information for them to absorb and to digest and understand. For example, advertising and sales information, which is basically flowing extensively through media, through multiple advertisements. So, and there are so much that the potential buyer simply misses the actual thing that he or she is searching for, because there is too much of this information which is there, and in so much bulk that they are even, I would say, unable to decide which one to pick out of all those things which are available. So that itself, this information overload, can also become a barrier as well. So things have to be kept minimum and specific so that they may reach the target audience for the right result. Semantic and the language barriers. Now this one, for few of you, or for many of you, I would say, there will be example that you'll be able to understand. But for few of you and many of you, it would be interesting as well. So if I go through it, barriers which are arising from the different meanings that even a single word can have, as you're going to see. So there are words that we'll be studying which are spelled the same way, but they have these different meanings. So within linguistics, which is basically the scientific study of language, there are different terms which are different terms for these different concepts. Homonymy and polysemy, these are the concepts, and hyponymy. These are basically the different concepts which are there to categorize these phenomena which are existing within languages, where one word with same spelling have different meanings, and sometimes two words with different spellings but with a single pronunciation, as you will see. So few words in front of you: charge, head, so bank, spring, and ring. So I'm leaving the first one because the next point is going to explain it. But in case of the head, this is also a head, and we also have heads within our department. So two separate meanings, a bit linked, but with two so different meanings. You have a bank across the road in the market, and there is this bank of a river as well. In a similar way, there is a season of spring, and there is always a water spring as well. While trekking, you find it sometimes, a water spring. And moving ahead, there is a boxing ring, and sometimes you have this ring within the finger. I don't have it, you know what that means, but basically words have different meanings, and these words are basically conveying different meanings as well. So if they are used according to a specific meaning, that is okay, but if your listener is unable to get which meaning are you conveying, that can become a barrier as well. For example, meaning would be derived based on this area of the interest. If they just see the word without looking into the context, when they hear the word, what would come within the mind of an engineering student? So they're going to take it as an electric charge. This charge would simply arise within their mind as an electric charge, whereas it would be more or less related to those charges in the form of fee or rent for a student of a commerce or business, and even for the other categories can have a separate meaning as well. Looking at words like these two words, if I talk about the first one, minute, or I would say minute, or the second one, should I say it as wind or wind, winding up, or the wind which is blowing. So spelled the same way but being pronounced differently to convey different meanings. So now if the other person is sure of one category but not sure of the other meaning, which can be conveyed by using the same spelling of that word, what problem that can create is something which you can simply understand. So now another way these semantic and language barriers can occur is this position of the stress. The way you place this stress on a word, just the way I place this stress on the word stress on the word, in case you have to signify it or indicate this stress. So in linguistics, you basically place this small sign just over the word. For example, now I'm basically referring to the fact that this barriers has to be pronounced as barriers rather than barrier, because in the other pronunciation that I have just said it, barrier is where I am, instead of ba, I am placing my stress on ra, barrier, but this is not the way it's pronounced because it will look like another accent, barrier, which means this sign is coming at that specific alphabet where you have to stress. So this stress and its position can also change the meaning. For example, if this is placed over here, so it becomes present, I'm present, or you have to give me a present. But if you have to present something in front of the audience, so over here this stress has simply shifted over here, present versus present. So this stress can also, if the other person doesn't know how to pronounce, or due to this different culture or different community whose language is basically not English, and if they are non-native of the English, and if they have to say the words, so they can confuse due to their mother tongue interference, may probably pronounce present as present and can cause trouble for the audience as well, once again becoming a barrier. So this position of the stress has to be kept in mind as well while dealing with your audience as well. Moving ahead, there are words which are comprehensible in writing and you are writing them, but once again their spelling is different but their pronunciation is the same. So when in case of a speech or someone speaking, they use such words, it can cause a bit of confusion as well if you are not sure of the context. For example, access versus excess. So the second one is more or less related to this increase of anything, whereas this one is more related with this access, that you need the access to the codes. I need an access to that area. So that axis is different from the axis which is on the right. Then there is one, you know what this is, flour, and the second one that is of course used in the form of bread and other edible material, although there are some flours as well. I'm talking to this one as well, which are also edible, but not many of you would know, but there are, and which are edible. But keep the difference, still it has to be maintained. If I take you towards the third category, now you know, after going through all those topics of plagiarism and citation, what this cite means and what this cite, you have been using it. So when they are written, they are understood, but when they are spoken, so they can cause a bit trouble, especially when the other person doesn't know much about the differences. Then there are words whose orthography, or I would say spelling, is mixed even in writing. Like why I always say that students make the error, even I can say that even I myself can make the error, or the teachers, while just writing in a quick way can mix this weak with weak and steel with steel. So these minor problems can cause a bit problem within this communication and can act as a barrier as well. From which category? The category of those semantic and language barriers. Then moving ahead, there are certain adjectives and adverbs which convey different meanings to different persons depending upon daily activities and way of life. This one is more or less related to your values, your ideologies, your perspective, your outlook, your way of thinking, your point of view. So it can be like totally related with your whole personality. What persona do you have? How do you take or how do you define good and bad? Although we have some moral definitions of what good and bad is, but there are certain things that you probably may think good, but the others may not. They may have some reservations. You can look into it, critically analyze it, you will understand. But the point is that this definition of good and bad, beautiful and ugly and so on, these binaries or these differences can vary depending upon your personality. For something for someone may be good, but for the other not. In a similar way, people can have a bit different or versatile definition. If I talk about a simple word, that is beautiful. How do you take something beautiful? How do you define beauty? How do you perceive it? How do you receive it or conceive it? Your conception might be different from the way I conceive it. So it can be a bit different, and if these are not linked or if these are not being acknowledged or recognized, can become a barrier as well. Reverting back to these barriers, words such as a table may suggest a writing table, can be a dining table, or can be a statistical table that you may have in your report or any other document that you are preparing. So one single word, if I say, where's the table? I can't see it. So you will simply be surprised for a second and say which table the teacher might be referring to, the writing table or the table. The context will try to help you out for the comprehension, but if the other person is not aware of the context, it can become a barrier as well. Word chair can be something to sit on or a place to occupy, as we have chair within different faculty, chair of different organization, and chair within the department. What does the word home convey to you? Now this is the question that you may ask one another within groups, with your friends, but just take this general opinion that when I say the word home, what comes within your mind? Your own home where you sleep, or your hometown, your home ground, your country as a home, or the continent, or itself, this your planet. You take this as a home, other than all the other planets of the solar system and the galaxies and every other thing which is there. The universe is big, but the point is, now you know how versatile and extensive the meaning of the word home is. This can cause and can become a barrier as well, this versatility. So if the proper acknowledgement is not being given to these words. Then another category is this emotional experience, this experience of the past with some matter, and the cultural attitudes toward some component or something can evoke different responses in people. If someone had this experience of a dog bite, they probably might be more scared compared to those people who didn't and are keeping dogs as pets. So this emotional response is totally different for the one who had this dog bite and the one who loved to play with these dogs. So that's why this common example was shared over here. It all depends on your past experience and your cultural attitude, how your culture takes this behavior. For some, it will be okay. For the others, it can have a bit of problem. Moving ahead, there are certain phrases which are a bit tricky. For example, if you hear this expression, a red and a blue carpet. So one way or another, it is referring to that there probably would be two carpets. One is red and the other is blue. But when you hear a red and blue carpet, so this probably is indicating the fact that there is a single carpet and it has these both two colors, red and blue. But not all the people are going to keep this difference within mind. While even despite the fact you're trying to discriminate between the two, they're going to take this all the same, and that is a single carpet which has these two colors. So once again, becoming a barrier. My apologies for pointing my fingers, because I told you at the beginning that this is the way you have to say it. Sometime it happens, but I have to practice it to keep it in mind. Moving ahead, sentences can convey entirely different meanings depending on how they are spoken and what is being emphasized or stressed. So this is the expression, and because I explained it within my previous lecture, I'm going to just talk about it briefly by giving you the example. What can I do for you? What can I do for you? What can I do for you? Or what can I do for you? So 4 expressions just for your convenience, but this stress, this rise and fall and emphasis has conveyed different meaning. And if you are able to get it, it's okay. Otherwise, this variation, rise and fall, emphasis and stress itself has become a barrier as well. So this proper comprehension is needed. Otherwise, these impediments are, surrounding us from all over. Then there are technical terms which can also become a barrier to communication. Just think of the example of those high-tech, low-tech and lay audience. And if there are high-tech audience, so of course it'll be okay to share these technical terms, they know it. But with the lay audience, if you start using these technical terms, now you know what is going to happen. Barrier, you're creating it. Because they are known to few. And one important thing with this, you should understand everything regarding these semantic and language barrier is that meaning is basically within people, not in words. So which is why you find all these variations, all these contexts. Even we give new meanings to different abbreviation, we give rise to different abbreviation. You have them. Even when I came across, it was a young age, the first time this laugh out loud expression that is used in text, so I couldn't make sense of it. Why is it coming lol again and again, with some smiles, with some emoticons, but it keeps coming. But gradually from the context I started to realize it's more or less related with humor and got it. But at the beginning, these things, if they are not known, can cause trouble and can become a barrier, because we the people give meaning, not words. Socio and psychological barriers. So these are the ones. Socio, once again related with sociology and society, and psychological barriers are the one more or less related to you and your behavior. So problems of the understanding, the interpretation and response to communication, which of course arises partially from our socially learned attributes and partially from the personally learned attributes, the psychological part. Now, to understand it, first you need to understand how a message is basically received by an individual. If I have to receive a message, so first I'll receive it physically through my senses, level 1. Level 2 would be the intelligence level, in which I'll start working within my brain after receiving the message to understand it. And once it's understood, it will go to the third level of the emotion, the emotional level, in which I will be developing a response. What that response can be: pleasure, a dislike, or indifference to pleasure, plain, whatever it is. I'll be indifferent. So this is the way a message is basically received. But the effect is on this emotional level, which is why everything was explained to you from scratch and from the beginning. This emotional level is basically affected by these barriers. How it all happens is something that we'll be looking into. Starting from these self-centered attitudes. So hearing everything, what are these attitudes? Hearing everything in the light of our own interest. What interests us, what is suitable for us, what is something that we like to talk about and listen to according to our needs and desires. So that can cause problem, because everything other than your likes and dislikes, I would say likes and interest, would be ignored by your memory. And it might be something important that the other person wants you to convey, but this self-centered attitude won't let you accept the other opinion coming from the other person. Paying attention only to messages which are useful to us, meaning something which is useful to me is something that I'll accept it, I'll delete everything other than that. So this delusion, because of the interest, is becoming a barrier. Not accepting others' point of view is also a bad habit. This rejection, this ignorance is a big barrier as well, where I would suggest, after reading this point and after speaking and talking about this point, that we should always respect the opinion which is coming from the other person. You can have your reservation, you can have your likes and dislikes, but when this message is coming towards you, it should be accepted, it should be received. And then, because it's basically a point of view, and simply you can talk about it, you can discuss it, you can negotiate with respect to it, and then come up with some consensus if it's possible. But total rejection is not a good act, not socially accepted act as well. So this is the point that I wanted you to convey. Not good for even building good relationship if you really want to develop this relationship with the audience. In case of these opinions and values, so these are influenced by the group to which we belong. This is basically known as this group identity that you have. We are always trying to associate ourselves. From the early age, we identify ourselves to be a group, which is our family. Then, of course, we have a group in the form of a class. Within that class, we also have some special group of friends, and there are some other categories as well that you can simply see. Family, relatives, you have a neighborhood, you can simply represent yourself as city, you can be having a common nationality, a class at a college or a university, or even a workplace where you're working, and taking it to even a higher level, common nationality, people of common age, a group, one's gender, a group, and even people speaking one language, a group. So there are different ways and basically ideas which are other than the ones which are accepted by a single group based on their point of unity are difficult to accept and are conventionally rejected, which becomes a barrier. So this awareness should be there within your mind as well, that this association leads to another problem, that whatsoever comes other than from that group is rejected, ignored, or overlooked, and this behavior also causes or becomes a barrier. So this recognition or acknowledgement should be there. Self-image, the image that you develop of yourself. What is it? Idea about what we are, what we look like, and what impression we make based on some truth, okay, because you are the one who know better about yourself, but some exaggeration which is going alongside those truths of all the good points that you have. So we should look into ourselves. That's called self-assessment, but not this category known as narcissism. You can look into it, you will know what it is, but it's you will find it in people around you. Sometime it's happening, but it's not a good practice. It has to be controlled. It has to be checked. How? A systematic self-assessment, which gives you a balanced self-image along with the feedback from others. So you should do the self-assessment, but it should be balanced with this feedback coming from the others, because the others are also critically looking into it, and you cannot find as much errors as the others can if you really want to improve yourself. So you should ask for the feedback from the others, and that feedback, if you make it part of your daily exercise or routine to make yourself better and improved, you can become a better individual and your self-image will improve automatically. But if you have one image of you and you are simply rejecting, if someone is trying to make you better by pointing all the errors, you are not accepting it. So this self-image is basically becoming a barrier. So mind it, and keep this point in mind, that it has to be balanced with this feedback. Feedback should be accepted and should be practiced to improve yourself. Defensiveness. This is more or less once again related, that if we feel threatened by a message, we become defensive. You don't like it, you try to have a dispute, you can counter argue, you'll start debating. So this behavior once again reduces this understanding. You are unable to accept it, and if you are not accepting it, you are basically defending the position. So this defense can cause problem. We may question the motives of others or even become sarcastic or judgmental. This is the extreme level, that someone is trying to suggest you to improve, but you are trying to be more sarcastic and judgmental over them, that what gives you the authority to decide who we are and what we should do. So if you are not giving them the chance or the space of improving you, this is basically becoming a barrier. So this basically is harmful in handling complaints and grievances and in basically resolving the conflicts. Even it's not good, especially if you want to reach at a consensus or unanimity or negotiate. So it's not going to happen if this defensiveness is actually turning into a barrier. Filtering is also a concept which exists around us. It's happening. It's basically the process of reducing the details or aspects of a message. If it's detailed, and if you want the other person, if he or she is asking for the gist, so you're going to remove the unnecessary details. But the question is, how do you categorize something as unnecessary? It might be unnecessary for you, but probably may not be for another person. So this filtering can also become a barrier if it's not done properly, especially through teamwork, because together they will know what's actually important, because you have a consensus, and what's considered unimportant was once again with a consensus. So something which is unimportant will be removed collectively. So information which has to be sent up the levels of hierarchy to reach the managers, the higher authorities, the executives, has to be condensed, integrated for the senior managers to give them the gist. But the more levels of the hierarchies, the greater is the filtering and the loss of information, because naturally while it's going up, it is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. So there are many things which are coming out and moving ahead. On one hand, of course, it's becoming a barrier. Organizational politics, which is withholding information among managers of the same level. Now, there would be an executive, there are managers which are working under him, and the resultant filter can become a barrier as well. So one manager got the information but not sharing it with the other, and just directly reaching the top executive to let him or her know that I know everything, I am better than this manager, therefore I need the promotion. So this person, this manager, is not sharing the information that he knows that he has got from the lower strata, not sharing with this manager So this not sharing of the information is becoming a barrier. So it shouldn't be there. Managers should also work as a team and provide the information together to the executive. In this way, it will not become a barrier. Socio and psychological barrier also covers another heading, which is the status block. Not that tricky, not that confusing. A word itself makes it as though it's a very difficult concept to accept, but the point is that a block which exists because of this status consciousness. For example, if there is a senior official and not that humble, a bit arrogant, a bit rude, and especially owns the position to whom he or she belongs and does not like suggestions or opinion coming from the lower strata. So just because of the fact that he or she is in a higher position, how is that possible that he, being the executive or the head, taking suggestions from people who are the subordinates or working under me, how can I take suggestion from them? So this status is itself becoming a block as well and should be avoided. Barrier developing from this social or official distance which is there between the employer and employee. So it can once again not only be there within an officer or the executive, it can exist within the employees as well. How? If I have this, that what position do I have? I'm just a simple employee at a very lower level, a very minor, a very mere small grade, and how can I talk to the senior most officer? I am in no position to talk to him. There are so many blocks. So I have created these psychological barriers. Of course, I can reach to him or her through proper channel officially. But if I am not doing it just because of this status consciousness which is there within my mind that I am in no position to talk to a higher officer, I have no place, it becomes that block. So it can exist at the top, you can even at the bottom. So this has to be clarified, otherwise it will become a barrier as well. Resistance to change. I don't think I need to talk about it because people are witness of it. They can understand, they can put themselves within the context as well, because we are all witnessing change. Change is part of life. We all evolve. Technology is like all around us. We can feel it, we can sense it all around us. Even look at yourself and just go back to the past. There were no televisions, there were no PCs, and now you can simply watch a video on your smartphones. It can be a tablet, can be a laptop, but you are able to watch it. It wasn't there earlier, so we are changing. So but in general, when there is a sudden change at the beginning, it's like a serious psychological barrier that it's difficult to accept it. Therefore it's like a resistance to the new and better ideas which are against established opinions, traditions and social customs. So even giving you the example of the education, if we are used to this physical teaching, teacher coming within the classroom and you attending the lecture, listening, jotting down all the points, and the story is over, the class is complete, you go back at home. But all of a sudden the teacher is there within your screen, you have to listen to the lecture, listening to me, taking all the points, attempting the quiz, then coming the assignments, GDPs. So this is new and you can feel it. There was a feeling of this insecurity or this fear, how is it going to happen, would I be able to manage it or not? So this is also natural, and this resistance to change is a barrier as well. So mind it, do not let it take over you. Accept that it is a barrier, but try to get rid of it and accept the change. If resistance to change is a barrier, so how to remove it? By accepting the change. So this is the point. Moving ahead, this narrow or closed mind is also harmful, very dangerous. How it happens? When you have limited intellectual background, limited reading and narrow interests, so that can cause a bit of problem because you are unable to think out of the box. So this closed mind is like a closed box, but if you want to come up with some good ideas, you need to open up that box and then the real ideas would come. So not to have this narrow-mindedness. Moving ahead, this poor communication skills, be it productive or receptive, once again can become a barrier. Talking about the productive ones, which are the writing and the speaking, so it can be the result of some nervousness or excitement, you getting a bit fearful whether I would be able to speak, but now I believe you can, because you had a good lecture on these presentation skills. You know how to speak publicly or write, because we know the writing process, we know the C's of communication. I don't think there would be any trouble with it. And talking about this poor receptive skills, in which you have to listen and read, so that can be a bit psychological shortcoming and requires a bit of training to overcome. So training can be done, some a bit of this exercise, and with that you can of course improve your listening by listening and improve reading by reading. So that can be done, and that will improve these skills as well. Talking about the state of health in the form of pain and fever, so this can also affect your communication by becoming a barrier. If you're not feeling okay, you won't be able to focus within your class, even you won't be able to listen to my lecture as well, but that doesn't mean that you do not get rid of the disease. Remember lecture number 20, within which I had this sore throat, but still I went for it. So I expect the same. Once again, repeating that point, that you have to get rid of that health problem. If you are ailing, there is some problem, because it's becoming a barrier. Get rid of it, and that will also improve your communication. There are certain behaviors which are known as the organizational or professional, and those are basically also becoming a barrier. How do they become basically a barrier? Once again, the awareness is needed. In case of this long vertical or horizontal communication, which involves this filtering and editing that you know already, there's a bit of overlapping, which is why the points are being repeated. There are some delays and distortion which are happening. But other causes of these distortion can be this misinterpretation, lack of understanding, and this neglect of a message by some members as well. So that can become a barrier as well, and especially referring to this professional environment of which now you become a part, where you are working. Another major cause is this deliberate suppression of the information out of self-interest and jealousy. Let's see the examples to understand what the point is. A senior officer may change this good information or a suggestion that has been provided by a subordinate to take the credit, like subordinate providing you the credit, I being the senior simply claiming while going to my senior that it's my idea, sir, and I took it, so therefore I deserve the credit, not him who provided me the idea. You simply flashing him out of the whole scenario. So this becomes a professional barrier, causing trouble within the communication. Moving ahead, a junior may also suppress a bad news or information from reaching the managers to avoid affecting his or her repute. So if you have done something and it probably can be reported to affect your whole report or your whole performance or your whole job career, so for that you will try to hide it as well. You are filtering it, you are blocking it, once again becoming a barrier. Withholding good information from peers perceived as rivals or claiming to be your own good suggestion can also become a barrier. So once again, does it require an explanation? I believe you all know it as well. Point is that you're not sharing good information with the others that you simply take as rivals. They are your competitors and you have to be better than them. There are two ways in which you can be better. So one is this negative way, when you have the information, you're not sharing it with others so that you will know better than the others. When the time comes of attempting the paper or telling it to the other person, you'll be impressing the examiners that you know better and the others don't. And there is another way in which you simply share it with others, they share with you. Both way, knowledge is a two-way traffic. You are getting new knowledge from them, you are giving them new knowledge as well. The level of this information is increasing together. In this, the level is also increasing. So if you want to really show that you know things, you can impress your examiners by this way as well. So why keeping it with you when you can share and learn from the other person as well? So in this way, if you are not doing it, basically you are becoming a barrier as well. And moving ahead, this over dependence on written communication can also become a barrier, because there are occasions where these written are not conveying and are not properly read the way they should be, where oral communication is better. For example, circulars, bulletins, notices, and even letters. So although they have the news which is there, but you're able to accept it better when you get it in the form of listening or through oral communication. So has to be used to supplement written communication when the message is really important. Then there are certain intercultural barriers as well. Once again, the same point where you should identify, of course, who you are, to which culture you belong, and of course respect and recognize the culture of the other people as well. Why? Because it's basically a shared set of values and attributes of a group. Total sum of ways of living built up by a group and transmitted from one generation to the other. And it's so much part of an individual's manner of talking and so on that communication style and competence are influenced by it. So therefore, skill in communicating with people of other culture is very much vital to success, especially at higher level, even when they are meeting at summits, all the presidents, even at United Nations, or even other forums where different countries are meeting. So all these forums where there are different cultures who are all together is the place where you should all recognize and respect the cultural diversity and differences. Starting from the language, of course, because that is also a direct reflection of culture. There are things which are different. For example, the proverbs and the idiomatic expressions cannot be directly translated from one language to the other in most of the circumstances, because these proverbs and expressions are different and they are more comprehensible within the language itself, instead of translating it into another language to make the other people of the other language understand what the language means of our foreigners, or for the ones who are not non-native. Then there are words which are not recognized by separate nations, and when they are used, of course, they can cause a barrier as well. By general convention, because Russians are considered to be the ones who have their separate economic system, and this free market system is, of course, applied in case of the Americans, this capitalism, free economic system, or the free market. So of course, the planned economic system is a bit different from the free economic system, which is why it is generally considered that Russians are not going to recognize or acknowledge it, this free market, and if this term or this concept is introduced, so that can become a barrier as well. Different connotation of words in different culture. This also happens. For example, the same word, like the word yes for Japanese, is used for saying yes, I'm listening, whereas for the Americans it's like yes, I agree. So if the American delegation meeting with the Japanese delegation, if they have to use this yes, just imagine how are they going to negotiate. There will be one will be saying yes, I am listening, the other will be saying yes, I agree. So listening is different from the agreement. They want your agreement as well, so becoming a barrier. The values, just the way I talked about it, what's good and what's evil, what's bad, can be a bit different. It forms the basis of our behavior and action. Notion of good, evil, and even taboo can vary across culture, and which is why it has to be clearly understood. Talking about the social relationship, this one is also a bit interesting, because if I just talk about the caste system, on one hand, our caste system is different. Within different communities, it will be different as well. Some communities may have the caste system, the others may not. So the community which does not recognize our caste system is not going to accept or understand when you simply say that I belong to this caste or this caste or that. So they're not going to recognize it, what you basically are trying to convey by simply reflecting your ancestry. They won't get it. Moving ahead, talk about these relationship as cousin. So giving you the example of the Urdu, Chachazad, Mamuzad, Phupizad. So these brothers and sisters, Chachazad Bhai and all those. So all collectively within this word. Talking about this uncle and aunt, once again same expressions, pupi, tai, and etc. Talking about uncle, mamu, chacha, taya, and etc. So there are all these expressions which are just summed up within these. You do not have separate categories to categorize them. On one hand, of course, you can say maternal or paternal aunt, but not in the same way. The people of one community are not going to take your expression in the same way as you take it. So once again, it can become a bit of barrier because you do not have exact translation of these words in their languages. Now talking about this concept of time. Time is very much interesting because it's also taken differently within East and West. Just the way you have it. In case of East, it is generally recognized to be circular in motion. Time is considered to be repeating itself one after the other. Time and again, the time is repeating just the way you have days and nights. So it's basically circular. Whereas this Western concept of time is that it's linear. It had a beginning and we are just one part within that timeline. We have our own age, we have a specific age, and afterwards we will die, but the time will move on, and it has this beginning and a time will come when it will have an end, but it's linear. It's moving from one direction to the other. It's not repeating itself. It's moving uniformly from one direction to the other. So this is the Western concept of time. So of course this is one culture and it can have a big impact as well while communicating. We're going to look into some other concepts as well with respect to time. There are different focus because for some past is important because they're a bit more nostalgic, of course. They think of their past, the time they spent. For some, present is everything, and they focus on that. This is the day, this is your first day, this is your last day, and what matters for you is the way you spend your present, because everything else is bygones. And for some, of course, future matters, which is why you work for your present to have a good future. So you see, emphasis or the focus is different for different cultures. For some, time is money, who are just focusing more on the time, saving it as much as they can. For the others, they say family comes first, or first the relationship, and then we can do the other task. Even different perception of time lead to different work and social behavior. For example, the idea of keeping this work time strictly separate from the personal time is this Western concept, and it's being strictly followed. If you look into it as well, they have these specific hours, and within those hours there is no such thing as this leisure time or this, the kind of break that we take either with friends or with family. Work is for work, and once it has been done, then they take their days off and they have their picnics, they have their break, and they do everything else to have some fun as well. But this is this strict division between the two. But in case of the Eastern culture, so there can be a bit of overlapping as well, because the focus is more on the task. If it's completed, that's what matters, rather than this strictness between these are the hours for work and these are the hours for the family. This professional punctuality also varies between these Eastern and Western culture, although encouraged and promoted everywhere. Even we are all encouraged to, if we have to complete our 40 hours per week, so it is expected to be done from 9 to 5. But in another case, it is, of course, strictly followed in case of West. I'm talking about the general conventions, not fixed rules or absolute rules, the general conventions as they have been observed. But in case of, returning back to this comparison, in case of the East, so there can be a bit of relaxation. For example, if you have to go somewhere and there are some few hours which are missing, instead of 40 hours, there are like 35 hours which you have completed. So you're going to come on Saturday, you're going to complete those hours which are missing, and in this way you have completed the hours, but not in that strict way in which it is followed within the West, the way within these examples it's being explained. So these are the bit of differences, of course. Now if you talk about time, if you have to meet someone someone meeting from the east with someone with the west, so they have to be very much careful because they are too professionally punctual. So when the meeting has to start, we have to be there because this is what they expect. So someone has to compromise and for a good meeting, for some good results. Talk about space. Once again, there are cultural differences. For example, the generally social and professional distance is considered generally to be less in East between friends, between colleagues, between relatives, and more in case of West because they try to be more professional, so they maintain this social distance which is there between the people. Some people even try to move forward even while talking on the table with the other person, while the others keep their distance while talking with the others. So this is also the same difference, that if I move ahead to talk to you to stress on some point versus my way of maintaining my distance with you while talking. So there could be a bit of difference when it comes to space. The thought process also varies because it can be either more scientific, logical, clear, rational, or law-based, versus the other which involves the emotions, a bit more holistic, involving superstition and miracles. So both these ways of thinking would have different outcomes, can have a bit of clash as well. You can understand it better and you know what I mean. Then of course there will be non-verbal behavior differences which are also expected. For example, Indians use much more of those natural gestures than the British, and Japanese have more formal gestures for social interaction but less for body movements. And in case of the appearance, we had a good lecture regarding the interview skills. Ways of dressing and what is considered formal clothes is another problem area and has to be tactically handled based on the context where you need to interact, where you need to talk with another person, and to keeping in view that audience with whom you're going to interact. So all these things matter, and if not done properly will become a barrier as well. Your paralanguage, for example, the intonation, the stress, the pauses, the interruption, everything is interpreted differently across cultures. For example, the Japanese believe that those who know do not speak, whereas those who speak actually do not know. So they have their own convention. This is their principle, which is why I quoted here. Whereas the Americans fill the silence, they do not stay silent, they fill it with speaking. And interruptions are generally accepted in East but tolerated and generally considered bad in West because the convention is turn taking. So they take turns, one person completes. But over here sometimes happen, sorry to interrupt you, but I have to mention this thing over here as well. But over there, you wait for the other person. Once they complete, then you start. So this is their way, and the other way is, of course, something is there within your mind and you have to say it before it vanishes, before it goes away. So you just, sorry to interrupt you, with apologies, and then you say it. So these are some cultural differences which are there, but should be recognized so that it may not become a barrier while communicating with these cross-cultural individuals. And then talking about these perception, these Eskimos, the people of the colder areas, of course, there are some specific countries to whom these people belong, and because they belong to this cold area, if you just simply Google it, you will know what are those specific area, what is their habitat. So almost always covered with snow. So in our case, we are saying this word snow, and snow, you know what that means. Of course, we have snowfall in winters in the northern areas. But the point here is, for us, it's just the snow. But for them, they have categorized this snow into different categories. Slowly falling snow, fastly falling snow, big balls of snow and small ones. The words, I read it at a page and the interpretations were provided beside it. So I was just wondering, so many words just for the snow, but based on the speed and the size, they had these names. So these perceptions also vary, and if you don't know these differences when they are using it, can become a barrier as well. So with that, all understanding what an organization can do is, of course, they should also make an effort. If they need soundproof rooms, they should do it. and alongside it should introduce health programs, because if the health is becoming a barrier, it should be dealt with immediately. Visual aids should be used. Now you know what they are, you had a good lecture over it, and visual aids are going to play an influential role as well to convey a good meaning, and feedback is also another important factor which can contribute and avoid misconception and misunderstanding. So with this way you can try your level best with that understanding of all those examples that we have covered, and with these efforts which are provided here to overcome all the barriers that we have just understood and studied.
Let's summarize the barriers in effective communication as discussed in Lecture 29. We'll start with the rules for arrangement of words in a sentence. The preferred order in a sentence is the conjunction, then the subject and agreeing verb, followed by the indirect object and direct object, which should be followed by the place and time. For example, it is easy to understand when I say, "Because I don't have time now." Similarly, the following sentence is quite clear. "Tomorrow, I will tell you the story." Let's take a look at some of the basic structures for sentences. The simplest one is subject, verb, and then object. For example, "I speak English." If you wanted to use indirect and direct objects with place and time, the structure would become subject, verb, indirect object, direct object, place, and then time. For example, "I will tell you the story at school tomorrow." Adverb of manner is placed after the direct object. So the order becomes subject, verb, direct object, and then adverb. For example, "He drove the car carefully." In a question, the interrogative, like how or what, is placed first, followed by the auxiliary verb, the subject, then the other verbs, and then the indirect object, direct object, place, and then time. For example, "What would you like to tell me?" Or, "Did you have a party in your flat yesterday?" Adverbs of frequency are placed before the main verb, unless the verb is be. So, the order becomes subject, auxiliary verb or be, adverb, main verb, object, place, or time. As in the sentence, "I often go swimming in the evenings." At times, there are different faults in communication which can become barriers in getting the correct message across. One of these are physical barriers. These may be due to defects in the medium used for communication, which may distort the message, delay delivery, or lose the message completely. Another reason may be because there is way too much information or noise in the environment. Another type of barrier in communication is semantic barrier. In this, there may be words that have multiple meanings like charge, which may mean electrical charge or cost of an item. Another semantic fault may appear due to words like wind and wind, which are spelled the same but pronounced differently and have different meanings. There are also words that sound the same but have different spellings and different meanings, like flower or sight. Even with all of this, poor communication skills are yet one of the biggest reasons for semantic and language barriers. Another type of barrier is of the social psychological manner. These are problems of understanding and interpretation of the message due to socially learned and personal attributes of the receiver. A message is received at 3 levels: the physical level, which involves noticing through the senses; the intelligence level, which deals with the comprehension of the message; and the emotional level, which is a feeling associated with the message, like pleasure, dislike, or indifference. The emotional level is affected by the social psychological barriers. These barriers are based upon attributes such as self-centeredness, group thinking, self-imagery, defensiveness, filtering, and resistance to change of the receiver. The next barrier is the organizational barrier, which is mainly caused due to overdependence on written communication. As a result, misinterpretation or neglection of the message may occur. As culture is a big part of an individual, communication style and competence is influenced by it. Skills in communicating with people of other cultures is vital to success. Cultural differences include language, values, time, space, the thought process, nonverbal behavior, paralanguage, and perceptions. Overcoming these barriers are indeed a challenge, but organizations are making constant efforts for effective communication, which also includes some health programs. The use of visual aids can reduce the effects of these communication barriers, whereas feedback can also help in improvement of the communication method. Keeping these points in mind can help you communicate effectively every time.
So with this, I just simply take you towards the conclusion slide and simply placing a circle over it, meaning that we have covered all these components successfully. Now you can apply the word order rules as well, keeping in mind the way it has to be ordered, and alongside all the barriers which are there in our surroundings. We were not aware of them, but now going through the lecture, now you know what they are, and now you know how to control or keep a check over those barriers as well. So with this, I end my today's lecture. I will see you in lecture number 30. Till that time, take good care of yourself. Assalamu alaikum and thank you.